Possible U.S. response to Russia's use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. The scenario of Russia using nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine has been one of the most serious global security threats in recent years. Given the ongoing tensions, statements by Russian officials such as Vladimir Putin about lowering the threshold for nuclear use, for example, Russia's 2024 nuclear doctrine, and the United States' preparations for such a scenario, including 2024 reports on detailed planning for a potential Russian nuclear strike, examining possible U.S. responses is essential. This analysis is based on expert opinions, official reports, and strategic assessments, and remains hypothetical, as no such use has occurred to date. The United States has repeatedly warned that any nuclear use by Russia would have catastrophic consequences, but the precise response would depend on the type, scale, and targets of the nuclear attack. Below are 5 possible U.S. responses, from the lightest, focused on diplomacy and economic pressure, to the most severe, involving direct nuclear confrontation. Light response: diplomatic condemnation and intensified economic sanctions. At the mildest level, the United States may avoid direct military involvement and rely on non-military tools. This would include strong condemnation at the United Nations, mobilizing allies to diplomatically isolate Russia, and imposing new sanctions on key sectors of the Russian economy, such as energy, banking, and technology. For example, the U.S. could push for a complete ban on Russian oil exports. This approach would resemble the initial reaction to Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, but with far greater intensity. Such a response might encourage further escalation from Russia, as Putin could interpret it as weakness. However, according to 2025 U.S. State Department statements regarding security cooperation with Ukraine, this level of response could be paired with increased humanitarian assistance to maintain support for Ukraine without risking direct war. Medium response: dramatically increased indirect military support for Ukraine. At this level, the U.S. would sharply increase military aid to Ukraine without deploying American troops. This could include providing more advanced weapons such as long-range missiles, fighter jets, or enhanced air defense systems, enabling Ukraine to retaliate against Russian forces. According to comments by former U.S. General David Petraeus in 2022, the U.S. could significantly escalate support without directly entering the war, at the 2022 Council on Foreign Relations (CFR) report examining a Russian tactical nuclear strike suggested that the West should respond by increasing conventional support, which might also include humanitarian aid to manage radioactive effects. Severe response: direct conventional strikes against Russian forces. If Russia uses a tactical and limited nuclear weapon, for example, against Ukrainian battlefield positions, the U.S. might respond with direct conventional attacks. This could involve cruise missile strikes or drone attacks targeting Russian units in Ukraine, or even Russian bases near the border. A 2022 analysis suggested that this is one option for punishing Russia without using nuclear weapons. Examples could include destroying Russia's Black Sea Fleet or missile bases. This level of escalation increases the risk of a direct NATO-Russia war and could prompt further nuclear use by Moscow. Past reporting emphasizes that President Biden has tried to avoid such scenarios to prevent a third world war. Heavy response: limited use of tactical nuclear weapons in a more extreme scenario, such as Russia employing a strategic nuclear weapon against civilians. The U.S. might respond with limited tactical nuclear strikes, for example, low-yield weapons against Russian military bases. This would follow the principle of proportional response, aiming for deterrence without triggering full-scale nuclear war. Analysts have described this as one of the harshest response options. However, such action could trigger a cycle of escalation and raise the risk of global nuclear war. A 2022 report noted that the U.S. had warned Russia of catastrophic consequences, which could include such a response. Maximum response: full-scale strategic nuclear war in the worst-case scenario. If Russia uses nuclear weapons against NATO territory or major cities, the U.S. could resort to full-scale nuclear war, striking strategic Russian targets such as cities and nuclear bases. This level aligns with U.S. nuclear doctrine and would lead to mutually assured destruction. Experts emphasize that this scenario is unlikely, but if it occurred, it would be devastating, effectively ending modern civilization and causing massive environmental and humanitarian catastrophes. A CNN reporting in 2024 revealed that the U.S. had prepared for such a scenario as early as 2022, though avoiding it remains the highest priority.